Hi everybody. Today I'm doing a video that's not about fixing cars but about buying cars. I've had a few people ask, what should you look for when buying a used Mini? So today I'll go over the things I would look for if I was looking for a first generation Mini Cooper. First thing I would do is look over the body really close for any damage, scratches or dents, loose panels, or signs that the car has been in an accident or otherwise abused. It helps to look again along the sight lines, kind of get your eyes down real close and to look for any body damage that you won't notice when you're staring directly at a panel. For example, there's a dent right here that you can see because of the way that the reflection is different over the area where the dent is. Next, I'll just really quickly check the suspension. You can push on it, and the car should only rebound one time. If it rebounds more than once, the shocks are worn. Also, you'll want to drive the car and listen for any noises. Next, a real common problem on a little bit older Mini Coopers is the control arm bushings will wear out. And the easy way to check for this is you kick the tire from the front, and it shouldn't move hardly at all. This car looks pretty good. The tire's barely moving. If it's worn, you'll see the tire move quite a bit when you kick. You'll want to check the tires, obviously, making sure that they're all matching. You'll want to check the wheels for any damage. This one's got some curb rash. You want to check for brake life. These brakes have about 50% life remaining. Another thing I'd check for is moisture back here. I've seen some older Minis where they'll leak and the water will come in and actually fill up the battery box. So just check around here for any signs of moisture. You want to check the age of the battery. Battery should have a sticker here that shows the age of it. This one's a September 2014. And of course you want to check to make sure all the lights and the windshield wipers are working, as well as the door mirrors. Inside the car, I'll also check to make sure all the buttons and switches are working and that the windows go up and down, and check for pedal feel for the brakes and the clutch. Older Minis may tend to have a stiffer clutch than you might be used to in a Japanese car, for example. They tend to get stiffer over time. So if the clutch pedal is very stiff, it could mean that you're getting close to the end of life for the clutch. You should probably test drive at least one or more Minis so that you can get a sense for what is a stiff clutch pedal and what's not. Next, you'll start the car up. It should start right up. It should have a smooth idle. You shouldn't hear any rattling or noise. Next, we'll look under the bonnet. Some common problems under here would be the reservoir tank on the 2003 and earlier Minis. This seam here can crack. If you see any white lines here, it means this needs to be replaced. You want to smell for any coolant smell on the 2003 and earlier cars. The radiator can leak at the top inlet here. You want to look for any missing bolts or any hoses that look like they're in poor shape. If the car shows signs that it's been modified, you might want to keep that in mind, that it's probably been driven harder than average. Another thing you want to look for is at the strut towers. It's very common for these to have a little bit of deformation. This one's bulged a little bit, actually. This is very common for almost any Mini. You just want to look at it and make sure it's not something that's severe. You'll also want to look at the rubber here on the strut tower bearing. These can crack when they get old, and that can be a safety issue. When the car is running, you'll want to look at the tensioner assembly here. It should not be bouncing around. It should be stable, like this one here. If the tensioner assembly is worn out, it'll start vibrating and moving and make a chirping sound sometimes. And of course, we'll want to look for any signs of leakage as well. If the valve cover gasket is leaking, you'll see moisture along the back side of the engine here, typically. Another common problem is a leaking thermostat O-ring. The thermostat is right here, underneath all of these wires. If it is leaking, you'll see moisture collecting underneath. So let the car get hot, and then look for moisture and look for smells as well. Alright, next I'll put the car on jack stand so we can get a look underneath. You should never buy a used car without at least checking out what it looks like underneath. And what I'll do is put a block of wood here roughly slightly behind the mirror. And I'll jack up on that block of wood, and that will allow me to slide the jack stands onto the jack points, both the front and rear at the same time. So when I buy a used car, before I tell them that I'd like to buy it, I'll bring it home and I'll give it a good check over. Take about 30 minutes to an hour. Just check it over real good, give it an inspection, so I'm not buying somebody else's problem. Here's one problem. This car is missing its front jack point, and also looks like there's a little bit of deformation here. So I'll stick a block of wood in here just to spread the force out. Looks like this jack point's missing as well. He must have hit a low speed bump or something. First thing I'll do is I'll pull vertically and horizontally on the wheel. I'm looking for signs of play. When I push in the vertical direction here, if I feel looseness, it means the wheel bearing is going bad. And in the horizontal direction, if I feel looseness, it typically means there's a ball joint or a tie rod. And there should be just a little bit of play because the steering wheel is moving when I do this, but you shouldn't feel any slop. I'll do the same for the back wheel as well. What I'll do is I'll grab a flashlight and a small pry bar, and then I'll go in here and without damaging the grease seals, I'll just kind of push on the various ball joint locations and make sure they feel firm. These are the control arm bushings. This one's actually been replaced with aftermarket polyurethane, which is a good thing. If it still has the stock bushings, you'll want to look for any signs of rubber fatigue or tearing. These typically go bad after about 60 or 70,000 miles, although it depends on what type of driving or what type of road surface the car has been on. I'll just inspect everywhere for any signs of underbody damage. Yeah, it looks like hit a rock or something here. It's nothing to worry about. It's just another data point for you to consider. And I'll just look across here to make sure there's no other damage. So it looks all right. This car's been modified. It has the one ball mod. Typically there's two muffler canisters, one on each side. This one, there's been a section of pipe welded in here, which is actually, as long as the weld's in good condition and the pipe is not rusted out, I don't think that's anything to worry about. It gives the car a better exhaust note, and it's a very popular modification. The one thing you'll want to look out for is make sure that the tailpipe is hanging straight in the cutout here in the bumper, because it's only being held by an exhaust hanger on one side. You want to make sure it's been done properly. I just noticed here there's water inside the tail light, the backup light, so that needs to be addressed. Looks like there's probably a cracked housing here allowing water to get in. This car's got an aftermarket suspension. Typically the stock suspension starts to get really rough after about 70 or 80,000 miles. Okay, now we'll go up and check out the engine. The Minis are pretty notorious for having oil leaks, and this one is no exception. The most common leak is a crank position sensor O-ring, which is actually on the front of the engine, in about this location, about this far up. When that leaks, it causes oil to come across the bottom of the oil pan. It's frequently misdiagnosed as a leaking oil pan gasket. It's actually not that hard to replace, but the room is extremely tight, and it's probably best if you put the car into front end service mode to do that. The gasket itself is extremely cheap, and it's not a major thing. It's just a very common leak on these cars, and I'd say it's probably a lot easier than trying to change the oil pan gasket itself, which requires removing the belt and the air conditioner compressor and all kinds of bad stuff. The other places where you can get a leak is from the rear main seal and the front crankshaft dampener seal. Those typically don't start to leak unless the car is over 100,000 miles. I mentioned earlier the valve cover gasket. Another place oil can leak is the oil filter housing. Kind of hard to see. There's a silver piece right there above the axle. If it's leaking from the oil filter housing, that area of the engine will be wet. You'll also want to check the power steering fan. It should spin freely with no grittiness. And looks like this car's got a power steering pump leak as well. This is usually due to the hose, the inlet hose there. It either comes down all the way from the cap up on top, or the hose inlet here needs to be tightened. You might want to check also to see if the power steering pump has been replaced. These are pretty notorious for going bad in these cars. However, there's an extended warranty for most model years, which covers up to 13 years and 150,000 miles in the US. I'm not sure what the warranty status is in other countries. If the power steering pump is noisy, that can sometimes mean that it's getting close to its end of life, but not always. And you'll want to check this lower engine mount to make sure the rubber here isn't cracked. One of the last things we'll want to check is the axles. You want to look for any torn boots. If these are cracked, the grease will leak out and dirt and grime will get in there, and they'll start to make clicking sounds when the car is turning. For manual transmissions, you'll want to make sure that the clutch slave cylinder is dry. If this part's worn, it'll start to leak hydraulic fluid out around this rubber seal here. Also, don't forget to check the fluids. For the oil, what you want to do is look inside the filler cap and look for signs of carbon buildup in there. If you see sludge or black buildup, it can be an indicator that the owner hasn't been keeping up on the oil changes. When the oil's in there for a long time, it'll accumulate moisture, and that'll kind of have a sludgy or a grimy look on the top of the filler cap typically. This one looks like it's actually been changed on a regular basis. You want to check the brake fluid. If it's really dark, that means that it hasn't been changed in quite some time. We'll want to open this reservoir, being very careful, and allow the engine to cool down a bit before you do it, because it says do not open the cap when hot. And we want to look for proper fluid level. It should be just above these, there's little S-shaped plastic things sticking out in there. It should be right about at the level of those, or just above it. Looks like this car is just a little bit low, and the coolant should be clear. This car's got a cloudy appearance to it. This is a common problem with the 2002s and 2003s, where the coolant actually takes on a cloudy appearance, but it should be clear on most on the other model years. Okay, we've got a dipstick that's about to break off here. This is a fairly common problem in these older cars as well, where it'll break off and then you'll lose the dipstick down in the tube there. So this needs to be replaced pretty much right away. And you want to check the belt condition. There shouldn't be any cracks or fraying at all. So that's pretty much it. Those are the common areas that you can have issues with an older Mini Cooper. You just generally want to make sure the car has been taken care of. Some of these issues are not a big problem on their own, and you'll just want to consider that compared to the price of the car, whether it's a good value or not. So considering this is an 11-year-old car, I think I'd probably give it about a B-. So that's pretty much it. I'm sure I've forgotten something. If anyone has any questions, please let me know in the comment section below. Click subscribe, click like if you like this video, and thanks for watching. Bye-bye.